Have you ever realized that you have no idea what's going on? Like you thought one thing was happening only to realize that a completely other thing was actually going on? Like the rug of reality had been pulled out from beneath you and you're toppling over, trying to get your bearing, hoping not to break something as you fall down to what is actually happening from the height of your perceptions. In 2011, I was traveling across Asia. We had just landed in Kuala Lumpur, the capital of Malaysia, and we were going out to explore the city. Now, it was Saturday, a day where the city should have been bustling. I mean, it's a metropolis. And as we emerged from our hostel, we looked around, and there was this eerie quiet. People were just standing on corners in small groups, looking at each other. Now, of course, I had never been to Kuala Lumpur, so I didn't know that something was really off. It seemed a little bit different than what I expected. And so me and my traveling companions, we went out to the Batu Caves, where this huge statue of Hanuman, the Hindu god, is. A monkey almost stole my backpack, and then we got back on the train and headed back down towards downtown. It was at that moment, when we took a step off the train and descended down onto the street, that I realized that I didn't know what was going on. I looked around, and those gatherings of people on the corners were there, except this time there were more of them, and they looked more nervous. And were talking to each other in hushed tones. We looked back, and the train station that we had just got out from suddenly closed, the gates coming down, and armed guards stopped and barricaded the entrances. We looked around, trying to understand what was happening, when I started to hear a hum of noise. It was hard to tell exactly where it was coming from. I looked around, trying to get a sense, and I noticed that everyone seemed to be peering in this direction. So I looked, and I could start to see the faint movement of a crowd. A crowd slowly moving towards, converging, pulsing towards where we were. It was in that moment, with the dawning realization that something was happening here, that I looked to the other side, and I started to see the police in their riot gear beginning to arrive, their heavily militarized vehicles, their tear gas canisters being loaded, their riot shields being prepped, the crowd coming this way, the police coming this way. Our only escape of the train blocked off. Now, we were trying to get across the city to catch a bus to go meet our friend who is from Malaysia, but we couldn't exactly get there, and there we were, in between a mass of thousands of protesters, the first anti-government protesters in Malaysia's recent memory in the last 4 or 5 years, and the usual response from the autocratic regime. There we were, smack in the middle. What I thought was just a vacation was turning out to be something altogether different. I wonder if that's ever happened to you. I mean, not that exact situation. If it did, I'd love to talk to you. But I wonder if you've ever found yourself lost physically, emotionally, or spiritually. When it seems like the rug of reality was pulled from beneath you, and what you thought was true seemed no longer true. That you found yourself disoriented, tumbling, finding yourself in the situation where you didn't know how bad it was. Or maybe you did, but you were stuck from truly comprehending or fully wanting to realize it. Maybe that moment is now, maybe it was 4 years ago, maybe it is precisely now, with the loss of a great judicial luminary, with the impending divisive election, with the pandemic making its long play evident. Just breathe. when many of us are running on fumes. When your school district decides to shift to in-person education before the date they promised that they wouldn't change things by. Just breathe. Or maybe, like my family, you received news this week that you were exposed to COVID-19 and had to rush to get tested, had the interesting experience of a stranger sticking things up your nose, upending your week as you waited for results, which were negative, thank goodness. But they very well didn't need to be. Just breathe. Disorientation is a part of life. It is, in fact, probably far more common an experience than the opposite. And while our friend Gandalf might say that not all who wander are lost, many of us who do wander feel lost. We are searching for that map, for that big "you are here" dot to appear to help us get our bearings, waiting. Just breathe. As militia are taking to the streets across the nation, as ash is in the air from wildfires, as a plague spreads across the face of the earth, I will admit that I've thought to myself, not seriously, but also not comically, what if we are living in the end times? Maybe you've thought that too, as the sepia tone filter is applied to the sky, when despair over the climate crisis is coming in full tilt, with the crumbling of what seems to be the last ounces of democratic culture, or even when I'm particularly hangry, that is, hungry and angry, that wondering appears, is this the end times? Is all lost? Are we too far gone? When bookstores post signs saying, "We've moved the post-apocalyptic fiction section to the current affairs section," I do wonder if we are living in the end times. But if this was the end times, I wonder what difference would it make to us, to our faith, to our lives, to our deepest of loyalties? Would we give up? Pack up and let the world burn? Or would we stay committed? Committed to what we know is true, even as everything crumbles around it. Just breathe. This week, inspired by these questions, I went back and I reread parts of Christian scripture that speak of apocalypse. Taking heart to remember in a cruel way, but also a comforting way, that other humans have thought that the end times were upon them. And of course, some of them were right. But I also was reminded that the root of the Greek word apocalypse is unveiling. And we have seen an unveiling, haven't we? An unveiling of white supremacy in our governments, in our police forces, and in our lives, unveiling to eyes that may have been able to deny it before. The unveiling of a pandemic where the richest fortunes have skyrocketed, where the lives of those on the margins have been hit harder and harder, and whose death certificates read COVID-19 more than any other. The unveiling of the hypocrisy of politicians who make their political maneuvers based not on their stated values or principles, but on the politics of the moment, playing with lifetime's appointment, forgetting that hypocrisy is a lifetime appointment in itself. Just breathe. Because as Joanna Macy reminds us, the great turning towards that life-sustaining civilization that we are all called to build in this faith is occurring at the same time as the great unraveling of what was before. The apocalypse, the unveiling of what is true, Just breathe. Because another truth has been unveiled. Have you noticed? In the apocalypse of this moment, the truth of where we are, where you are, of what we have at our disposal, the truth that all of this is, in fact, enough. Unveiled in this time has been our collective courage, our creativity, the refusal to give up joy, the hope that is in our very bones, the energy to fight, fueled on by memory and ancestry, our hearts hearing the longing of life itself and adding our voices to the chorus. Remember that shit is just another word for compost. What fertile soil we find ourselves in, friends, for this unveiling of truth, for the seeds that we will plant together. So wherever you find yourself this morning, if you are despairing in the unknowing of what will happen, wondering if progress has ceased its forward momentum and will be set back forever, if you are there, if grief at what we must ask of each other, that we must hold on to our dying breaths to ward off violence, disenfranchisement, and cruelty, if you are there, know that here is enough. That there is enough space for all the feelings, enough here to be reminded slowly of ourselves and to feel that pull of love, enough to begin again as the day begins each day. Here is enough. For here is where the magic of possibility finds the root. If only we would notice, alertness is the hidden discipline after all. So stop. Breathe. Remember that everything that seems miraculous in this life, everything that made a path out of no path, everything that changed anything, is no more extraordinary and contains no more extraordinary elements, particularities, humans, or realities than exists in the very stuff of yours and mine and our beings. That no other moment in human time is more extraordinary than this one, ourselves. So stop, breathe, and listen. Listen for the movements and the voices, still, small, mighty, or loud. What are they telling you of hope, of life, of truth right now? What are they telling you of the time to come and the time that we have been? How are they orienting you to what is possible, grounding you in the reality that is inviting and ready for you? I invite us to stay with these questions, of what we are being told, of truth, of life, of hope now as we listen or sing to this song. Think of it as a meditation, a time to check in with what is true. You may close your eyes and reflect. What is it for you to hear in this moment of voices small, still, mighty, or loud?